Hello, hello, hello. This is a test. I don't know if I don't make 10 minutes, then I'm not going to do this. Um, it's interesting because I'm looking at this. So today, today's Sunday, right? It's the day, Sabbath day in Christianity. Um, that's the only religion that has Sunday as a thing, right? It's interesting. Where I come from. Um, you know, uh, uh, Interestingly, it's always, religion's always been, a pretty big deal, right? Like the idea, if you look at sort of America, I think that most people are under the impression that, there's sort of this idea that Christian men founded America. And I remember, I think that that's sort of the image. In other words, like, I think that it's sort of like the tall tale that gets told, right? And I think, I remember a freshman year, I think, of school. I think my roommate, you don't get to choose your freshman year. Oh man, no, but it's interesting because I remember he delighted in the fact that. America was not a Christian nation. Like, what does it mean to be a Christian nation? Well, presumably, right, it would mean that you're told what to believe, right? Like, it's sort of like this is the Christian state, and therefore you have to believe that. But obviously the Americans pride themselves on sort of this idea of freedom of religion, right? So believe what you want to believe. In other words, like we don't have to tell you what to believe, right? Your parents might, your school might, if you go to Catholic school or whatever school, that might tell you what to believe. Your sort of town might ask why you're not in church on Sunday. That might tell you what to believe. But legally speaking, that doesn't tell you what to believe, right? Um, it's interesting because I do think that we have this idea of like Christianity being sort of the thing, right? And so I remember my that friend, he was an atheist, right? And, being an atheist when I was in high school, that was like the cool thing. It's interesting because like I said, when I was in high school, which I guess to date myself, I don't know how old I look. I'll just date myself in the interest of trying to get to 10 minutes. Uh, I went in high school in the 2000s, right? So mid to late 2000s, right? I was in high school. And that the big thing was to be an atheist, it's interesting because I think there's at the time, and I don't know, sort of, to me some of this stuff is pendulums ish nature, right? So sort of like swings on a pendulum, but it's interesting because that was the smart thing to do, right? So belief in religion, especially sort of this blind belief in religion, um, is not considered. In other words, there's something about sort of like a failure to think for oneself, right? And I think that got reflected. So it's ironic, but in my school, or sort of as I was growing up in high school, the point was that there's sort of a political thing about religion, and I think it's always been a political thing about religion, in such that atheists were viewed as more sort of left leaning in their politics, right? And left leaning being, I don't think I speak inaccurately when I say that the left in the late 2000s was considered or incorporated the term liberal, right? So I think, in a sort of the idea was you had a liberal or you had a conservative, and the conservative would be the right and the liberal would be the left, right? And like I said, I think I don't know if I touched on this now. I think that's kind of changed. In other words, like I've heard, and I don't know, maybe this is a test of my intelligence. I think most people might consider there to be some room on the left beyond being a liberal, but that a liberal in and of itself primarily advocated for things that might be considered left politics. Specifically, right, maybe the ability to choose one's own religion or not to believe a religion, right? And so the idea was that being an atheist was sort of the smart thing to do, right? Because it involved why exactly did it wasn't the smart thing to do? Would involve the idea, presumably, and I don't want to speak for any atheists, but I'm gonna throw this out there as one of the reasons you might become an atheist, is because it involved the idea that you relied upon rational and right necessarily and here let's calm down and really think about this. It relied upon the idea it embraced the idea that you relied upon rational and empirical grounds for decision making, right? And so that would imply that if you're an atheist, right, you probably like sort of a scientific conception of the world, right? And so your understanding of the world would be for, sort of based upon like sort of this idea of using the scientific method, right? And that was presumably, what made you an atheist, right? One of the reasons why you didn't want to believe in something that could not be proven, right? Or sort of grounded. The idea that there was a God is in other words, it's not logical. I think you might say, atheism is more of a sort of question of logic. Um, but regardless, it's sort of this idea that a blind faith in something that you cannot see with your eyes is sort of what makes you an atheist, right? And so that's sort of the idea, right? And so it's interesting because I do believe that I got this conception as well, right? Sort of the classic person who sort of went to church, and the idea was that you're going to church and you're sort of becoming all sort of festered with this religiosity, when in reality it's looked upon as somewhat like a lack of thinking, maybe a lack of sort of critical examination. That's interesting. I just want to, so anyway, so what's interesting is that, like, obviously, I'm interested in two things, right? So the first aspect would be its ties to obviously what we're talking about in this series, right? So it's sort of like, personality, et cetera, how it relates to me. And then also maybe how it relates to different cultures around the world, because this is very interesting, right? So I didn't realize it, but apparently we might get to 10 minutes. We might go over now because I that was a long intro, right? Anyway, so but it's interesting because I didn't realize it, but Poland is actually like mostly Catholic. I had no idea that Poland, because I think you remember, like, Poland was the sort of country, quote, air quotes there, but Poland was the country that sort of submitted to Nazi Germany in like 2 weeks, right? They didn't know how to fight, right? It's interesting, but they were also this and they had a lot of sort of religion, but see, but I don't think I personally ever associated Poland with Catholicism. It's interesting. I actually do have a relative that's Polish, right, or somewhat Polish, half Polish, right? I don't know if you can be full Polish, but I'm just kidding. The point is that, like, and I don't mind saying this, as I think I don't know what I'm gonna all say in this video. I mean, I think we're almost at 10 minutes now, but it's interesting because you look at Poland, and Poland is sort of very Catholic. Poland is not known for its dominance. Maybe, I mean, I think there are thinkers from Poland, but it's interesting that that's an unexpected country that's sort of Catholic. I mean, you look at obviously Italy, right? Still very Catholic, presumably, right? Ireland's very Catholic, and then France is still Catholic, right? When I think of France, it's Notre Dame, Cathedral, etc. So it's interesting to see, different countries, and I don't know if I mentioned Ireland. So it's basically like there's a sort of a crescent, right? You go from Poland to Italy to France to Ireland. It's interesting because all of those countries are not, necessarily like military powers. Although I think France is probably the most famous of those. I mean, Italy too, Rome. But I think Rome, and obviously Rome had this sort of Catholic empire, and they were also, when we think of Rome, we think of the ancient Romans, not the Catholicism, the Catholic Romans, right? So Catholic Romans is not really the Romans that we sort of revere. That's interesting because, but it does sort of indicate that I think that if you take the current state of affairs, and it's still to this day, what I think is interesting is how I think the viewpoint is kind of shifted, or at least my perception of it. And please correct me if I'm wrong. He said, I think in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, the idea was to be an atheist, but sort of a liberal atheist, right? And now, correct me if I'm wrong. It's interesting because it seems like the flavor of atheism these days is not to sort of, I mean, it's not clear what exactly grounds atheism these days, right? So it's interesting, and this gets me to, so anyway, I'm looking at the cultures. I find it interesting that there's sort of a pattern of countries around Europe. I mean, I think Europe is still Catholic, but I think that it's interesting, like, which countries in particular. Obviously, Spain. I forgot Spain. Spain. Why would you remember Spain? Just kidding. Spain is also very Catholic. I'm not sure about Portugal, but that's interesting, right? So all of these countries, very strong ties of Catholic, and it's interesting, like, what sort of the drive toward a religion, very strong in the old world, at least presumably used to be. And now it's interesting because now it's sort of like this drive toward a sort of atheism. And the question would always be sort of, well, who takes religion seriously, right? So you might imagine religion as a sort of a way to control sort of peasants, right? So the idea of worshiping a god is sort of, you can make a quick association to worshiping a king, right? Or worshiping sort of this noble class of aristocrats, or something like that, right? But then we sort of look at sort of, well, what sort of personality factors do we see for religion? And it's interesting because obviously the frame that you can look at it is sort of the Jungian functions, right? And then you can also look at it just in terms of sort of self-report. So I'm actually looking at this data, and I see that people who, and this is this website, people who prefer to observe things, which is interesting, right? Because, like I said, it's interesting, the sort of idea of atheism, sort of what grounds that. What is the sort of rational or empirical basis for atheism? But and like I said, I say that, obviously, the reason I say that is because I can't. I'll be honest with you, right? I'm one to scoff at trends, right? I don't know if you got that about me. I can't stand people jumping on bandwagons because, ironically enough, it's kind of the idea of jumping on bandwagons that sort of underlies any sort of idea of critical thinking to begin with, right? So in other words, like, somebody recognizes that it seems smart to be an atheist, therefore they're an atheist. I have no respect for you, right? You either have to be an atheist because you truly don't believe, or whatever. Otherwise, I have no respect if you're like, look at me, I'm cool, I'm an atheist. The idea of doing something to be cool, I have no respect for whatsoever. I just want to throw that out there. But anyway, but it's interesting because and you can see, I make YouTube videos that peaked in 2005, and I'm sort of doing it. I'm doing it. It is what it is. I say that because that's a feature of my personality. Whether that's because of certain cognitive functions, whether it's because of my makeup, whatever. I don't. We can debate critical thinking stuff, and like I said, I'll never tell you what to believe, but I will critique your ability, your sort of tendency to jump on a bandwagon or do something because you think it's cool. Anyway, but the point is that, like, and obviously, boy, he just wants his Catholicism. I'm just kidding. No, but it's interesting. So what's sort of instigating this fire that you're seeing right now is that apparently there's sort of this is an interesting question. Agreement with you are very religious. So the question was, you are very religious. Do you agree or disagree? And there's a clear distinction, probably statistically significant, on the basis of one category in particular, and that category is observant versus sort. What is the category? The category is, basically observant versus intuitive, right? And so the idea is that if you score intuitive, you're going to be less likely, statistically significant. I'm assuming. I don't know. I haven't run the numbers. I haven't empirically verified that. But but I'm assuming it's pretty much like, if you're sort of, and this is sort of what this is, the person, the image you get is the person who sort of, was in my civics and economics class in in 10th grade, and talking about how they supported, like, who was the I don't, I'm just like, they were talking about that, right? And they were talking about, oh, like, "Oh, I'm an atheist, look at me." I don't need to, why am I so against atheists? I just think it's such a, like, cop out to say that. In other words, like, you can't disprove religion, so why would you sort of go against it, right? It's so interesting. But and that's my take. That's my official take, by the way. I think I respect agnosticism as a sort of as a sort of logically contained idea, right? But I just hard for me to say, like, atheism. It's just hard for me to. It's hard for me to understand atheists. It's hard for me to understand the position, right? From a logical perspective too. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, like I said, agnosticism probably logically correct, right? How can we prove? How can we disprove? I don't know, right? You believe what you want to believe. It's sort of, we're in voodoo land. Atheism is a sort of thing, right? And that people have made that argument before. I don't really care. I'm just saying that it's interesting because what I do care about is sort of what drives someone to say, one or the other. And then I care about sort of what causes. I care about what drives someone, in terms of its cause, and then I care about sort of the implications of saying I'm very religious, right? What kind of reputational harm does that do to someone to say they're very religious? This is obviously the thing, right? What is, I would love to say I don't give a damn about my bad reputation, but the truth is, even though, I don't respect people who jump on bandwagons, the bandwagons are coming. The bandwagons are coming. The bandwagons are coming. Like, what are we supposed to do? Like, you want to be cool, kid? Smoke your cigarette. I'm just kidding. Anyway, the point is, this is the plight of my life, right? Like, I'm trying to be cool, but I'm trying to be like myself. It's like, it's that Spider-Man. It's that Spider-Man introduction where he's got, like, Venom versus Carnage, the suits, and they're sort of yanking at Peter Parker, the classic '90s. You would get '90s. Anyway, the point is that there's a very clear, like, consensus here that to be more sort of intuitive, which is to be, the smartest people are the people who say no to religion, right? It's interesting. I don't know. It's not clear exactly what that is on a functional basis, other than to say that it's someone who is maybe who goes with the flow more. Like, it's not clear to me, at least, right, that your perception of things influences your ability for critical thought or your tendency to engage in critical thought. But maybe that's mistaken, right? If I said you're very religious, I would probably answer no, because of the sort of modifier that, sort of very religious. To me, that, when I think of very religious, I think of like a nun or something, right? So I would say no to this, right? But at the same time, it's interesting because maybe that's the thing. It's just interesting. I don't know. I know that from a sort of a pure Jungian perspective, Jung was very clear that he thought religious experiences, which maybe form the basis for an empirical grounding of religion, was very irrational, and that he also thought that the more materialistic you were, the less likely you were to deem religion important. I mean, he literally says that in his sort of exposition of things. So that's interesting, like, sort of how that sort of reacts. I think, like I said, I think the people who sort of score a certain way on these websites, presumably, assuming that this is all sort of true, right? True, verifiable, etc., empirically grounded. Assuming that this is all empirical, then I think that the people who do that are the people who are more likely to want to live a sort of traditional lifestyle. And I think if you live a traditional lifestyle, you are a simple kind of man. And let me tell you something: I support simple kinds of men. And I also support finishing videos in 20 minutes. So I will say that's my rant. That's my sort of thing today. Hope everyone's having a good Sunday. Get some prayers in. Gosh almighty, you heathens. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Anyway, I always wanted to say that on camera. I'm just kidding. Anyway, have a good one, guys. Religious, not religious, whatever you are, it's your choice. That's the point. That's the ability for freedom. You've got a lot of resources out there. Type in something, and Google will tell you what to believe. It's your choice whether to believe it or not. All right. Looks like my choice to believe is that or not. All right. Bye.